Take a closer look at this picturesque scene. A serene river gently carries its waters through the lush meadows. At first glance, this landscape may seem unremarkable. Yet here, in this quiet corner of nature, nearly 3,500 years ago, an event occurred that is considered the first recorded battle in European history. Battle of the Tollens Valley took place between 1300 and 1250 BCE. During excavations, the remains of approximately 145 individuals were uncovered, although the total number of casualties is estimated to be between 750 and 1,000. This is astonishing for such a sparsely populated area of Northern Europe at the time. The primary participants were men aged 20 to 30, although remains of women and children were also found. The cause of the battle remains a mystery. Some theorize that the conflict was related to control over trade routes, such as the transport of tin, which was crucial for making bronze. The battle involved both ranged and melee weapons. Bronze arrowheads, spears, and clubs were found among the remains. At that time, no one could have foreseen that Europe would become the stage for countless battles. From the shores of Scotland to the steppes of Ukraine, so much blood has been shed that it is impossible to tally the number of conflicts. The endless wars of the Greek world, Roman conquests, the Crusades, the 100 Years' War, Napoleonic campaigns, and ultimately 2 world wars flooded this continent with the blood of millions of soldiers. Today, you will learn about 3 of the worst military disasters that had a significant impact on history. You'll explore how barbarian tribes crushed the greatest army of the ancient world, how 2 of the largest fleets in history clashed in the Mediterranean, and how the French knightly cavalry lost its status as invincible after a single battle.
In AD year 0, the Roman army was by far the best in the world and rapidly expanding their empire's lands northward. Every soldier was well trained and motivated. The average term of service in the Roman army was 25 years, during which time the soldier underwent heavy and lengthy training to be ready to face any enemy. At the same time, the Roman army had incredible discipline that even modern generals would envy. In order to maintain well-trained and obedient soldiers, it was necessary to introduce an extremely strict military law, which had to be obeyed by both ordinary and high ranks. This procedure was, above all, to make the legionnaires completely loyal to the commander. A soldier had to be more afraid of what might happen to him in a Roman camp for failing to fulfill a task than of being killed on the battlefield. For example, if he were not found at his post or asleep during a guard's inspection, he would be court-martialed the next day. In case of conviction, the court-martial touched the guilty person with a cane, and then the soldiers, mostly his fellow soldiers, beat him with sticks or threw stones at him. At the same time, a reward system was introduced to motivate soldiers to fight even better and sacrifice themselves. Legionnaires, at the end of service, were promised a plot of land and privileges, and in addition, every soldier in the Roman army had the hope of promotion because centurions were killed quite often, as they directly participated in the battles. And there was always a chance that an ordinary legionary showing bravery could take the place of his fallen commander. And centurions, as you know, were paid more than the average legionary, and they were given better armor. In addition, soldiers were deliberately placed far from home so that they did not sympathize with the local population. So, the legionnaire obeyed even the most inhumane and criminal orders of the commanding officer without question. But even when soldiers were not serving to maintain discipline, they were engaged in construction. Thus, they were often assigned the task of building roads and fortifications. Tired men have no time to rebel. Don't think that the Roman army relied on training and discipline alone. Roman armor and weapons were the best in the ancient world. For example, the main uniform of legionaries was a helmet galea, which was designed for almost complete protection of the head. No other army of the period could boast of such helmets, and the body of legionnaires was mostly protected by lorica hamata, ring armor, or lorica segmentata, plate armor. The second, according to some sources, appeared just after the Roman Empire began to fight with the Germanic tribes, which easily pierced the ring armor with spears and a thin tip, fremia. And lorica segmentata fared much better in protecting the body from such weapons. Roman warriors, by the way, also used a similar spear, pilum, perhaps also inspired by the weapons of the northern tribes, but they improved it by making the tip much longer. Like the Germanic tribes, the Romans used pilum both for throwing and for stabbing the enemy. The secondary weapons of Roman legionaries were gladius, short sword, and spatha, long sword, which together with the shield scutum made the Roman soldier almost invulnerable to the barbarians. And a cohesive legion of such soldiers looked to the savage tribes like an armored war machine. And during the time of Julius Caesar, and later his successor Caesar Augustus, it seemed that the expansion of the Roman Empire could not be stopped. The Roman Empire occupied region after region until they crossed the Rhine River and met worthy opponents. In the forest beyond the river, there was a battle that was an embarrassment to the Roman Empire and turned the course of history. Within 4 days, the Germanic tribes destroyed 3 Roman legions and stopped the advance of Rome east of the Rhine River. And the heads of Roman legionnaires and centurions were hung on trees by the barbarians as a sign of victory over the Roman army. In history, this battle went down as the most crushing defeat of Rome. Julius Caesar's conquest of Gallia in the mid-1st century BC divided the predominantly Celtic tribes into Romanized provinces and free Germanic tribes with the Rhine River as a natural border. In the winter of 17 or 16 BC, the Legion V. Alaude lost its standard eagle during battles with the Germanic tribe Sicambri. Each legion wore the standard as an embodiment of the Roman spirits. Losing it was the ultimate dishonor. Because of this loss, Caesar Augustus realized the need to subdue the Germanic region. He spent the next 4 years increasing Rome's military presence on the Rhine River border and immediately sent his adopted son Drusus to subdue Germania. In 12 BC, Drusus led an army on a campaign to defeat the Sicambrian tribes and other North Germanic tribes. He forced the tribes to surrender, and some sources suggest that he recovered the lost eagle standard. Drusus then sent his legions into the dense forest east of the Rhine, where he built a fort and spent the winter successfully pacifying the region. In the following years, he advanced as far as the Elbe River in eastern present-day Germany. Up until he died in 9 BC, Drusus subjugated a vast swath of territory and tribes that the Romans collectively called Germania. After Drusus's death, his brother Tiberius took command of the troops in the unoccupied territory, and the region remained relatively calm until one decision by Emperor Augustus. He decided to tax the entire new acquired territory, which did not please the freedom-loving and very warlike Germans. The responsibilities of the governor of the Germanic provinces were performed by Publius Quintilius Varus, and under his command there were 3 legions. He collected taxes at the behest of Augustus, but this attempt to Romanize the provinces incurred anger among the tribes. However, there was no consensus among the disparate and perpetually warring Germanic tribes. So although Romanization and taxes did not suit them, the tribes could not gather in a large army to drive the Roman invaders out of their land. But all that was changed by Arminius. Arminius was the son of the Cheruscan chieftain Segimerus. As children, the young prince and his brother Flavus had been taken hostage by the Romans to ensure their father's obedience. While in captivity, Arminius learned Latin, became a Roman citizen, and made a successful career in the Roman army, serving as commander of the supporting cavalry. But despite his childhood in Rome and his status as a Roman citizen, Arminius was loyal to his tribe, and in his mind, he always had the idea of rebellion and liberation of his native land from the Romans. He returned to northern Germany in 7 or 8 AD, where the Roman Empire had established firm control over the territories east of the Rhine, along the rivers Lippe and Main, and was now seeking to extend its hegemony eastward. Arminius began plotting to unite the various Germanic tribes to thwart Roman attempts to incorporate their lands into the empire. This proved to be a difficult task, as the tribes were very independent, and many of them had traditionally been each other's enemies. Between 6 and 9 AD, the Romans were forced to move 8 of the 11 legions stationed in Germany east of the Rhine to quell a revolt in the Balkans, leaving Varus with only 3 legions to confront the Germans. Arminius saw this as the perfect opportunity to defeat Varus. He earned the trust of the Roman commander, who was unaware that Arminius had switched sides with his Germanic tribe. He deceived the commander by telling him about a fake rebellion, causing Varus to move to suppress it. But Arminius was preparing an ambush in the meantime. He knew the military tactics of the Romans very well. As commander during the violent Illyrian revolt, 6 to 9 AD, Arminius had noticed the vulnerabilities in the Roman legions. In some cases, The wild Illyrians were close to winning battles against the Romans, especially in the swamps, hills, and woodlands that hindered the superiority of the Roman army. Arminius decided to use the equally difficult terrain, which was plentiful in Germany, against the Romans. He knew that the greatest strength of the Roman legionaries was their ability to fight as a unit. So, he decided to lead the Roman legions into swampy, wooded, and narrow terrain, where their cohesion would be lost. Their marching column numbered about 20,000 men and was 7 to 8 miles long, although some sources gave a figure of even 10 to 12 miles. On the first day, Arminius and his supporting troops moved away from the Roman column, supposedly to do reconnaissance and recruit additional troops, and Varius did not doubt Arminius' words, which he soon came to regret. The rain started to fall early on the second day of the march, becoming increasingly heavy. The legionaries struggled against the pouring rain and the whipping wind as they trudged forward through mud that made the wagons barely crawl. In addition to the rain, a strong wind picked up, and according to the Roman historian Cassius Dio, treetops snapped, falling on the column. Bracing against the elements, the legionaries continued their arduous march. Entering a narrow passage between two sections of the Teutoburg forest, the unsuspecting, very tired Romans never saw the carefully laid trap and helplessly fell into it. Surrounded on all sides by barbarians, the legions descended into chaos. The Germanian warriors pelted the Romans with spears and flaming arrows. The column was surrounded, and turning back the legionaries was simply not possible. The Germans were most likely trying, first of all, to inflict maximum damage to the cavalry and the Romans' convoy crammed on the narrow forest road. But the battle-hardened centurions restored order in the column, gathering the nearest legionnaires and leading counterattacks to break forward. After a fierce battle, the first attacks of the Germans were repelled, and the Romans even managed to set up a fortified night camp on a nearby hill. While the legionaries erected barricades, the last of the Roman units fought their way out of the forest towards the main column. But the Roman transport was badly damaged, and they had only 2 days of supplies left, so the next morning, Varus decided to go west to the network of Roman military camps. For the next 2 days, the colony kept moving, fending off attacks from the Germanic tribes. But now, the Romans were better prepared for battle, and they marched on flat terrain, so the losses among them were already much less than on the first day of the battle. And the Romans even had hope that they could get to the military camp and would be safe. But soon, another ambush awaited them. On the third day of the battle, the legions approached the hill called Crecy, and they could only go through a narrow road stretching between the hill and the swampy area. The incessant rains washed out the dirt road, and it wasn't easy to traverse. It was hard to think of a more ideal place for an ambush, but that wasn't all. During excavations at the end of the 20th century, archaeologists found out that the Germans had built an earthen wall near the hill in advance, which gave the attackers the opportunity to attack the Roman column from it, and significantly constricted the already narrow and difficult to pass road. The Roman column had no other way out and had to follow the road, which for most of them would be their last. As the column approached the earthen wall, Arminius and the bulk of his German troops attacked the Romans again. The barbarians showered the legionnaires with a ceaseless stream of throwing spears and arrows. Most of the Romans hid behind their shields, while some cohorts, unwilling to remain passive targets, charged at the German positions. Most of these unsupported attacks were easily repelled. Others broke through but were shot down by the thousands of Germans waiting behind the earthen wall. The Romans were trapped, and all attempts to storm this wall proved futile. The most senior officer, Numonius Valla, abandoned the troops and deserted with the cavalry. However, his retreat was in vain as he was overtaken by the Germans and killed shortly afterwards. The Germanic warriors then went on the attack against the already exhausted legionnaires and slaughtered the disintegrating Roman forces. At this point, neither plate armor nor the best helmets for their time could save the Romans. Sandwiched between a wall and the swamp, the Roman army was paralyzed and communication between cohorts was cut, giving the Germanic army an even greater advantage. Arminius unleashed numerous throngs of his warriors upon the trembling legions. Throughout these 3 days of battle, German losses were likely greater than Roman losses, but they were constantly receiving reinforcements, whereas the Romans were still hundreds of miles from their fortresses. Although different sources describe the Germanic losses differently, some say that compared to the Roman losses, 15,000 to 20,000 soldiers, the Germanic losses were much smaller. The remnants of the Roman column, which managed to break through, retreated to the west and camped on a nearby hill for the night. Having no strength to fortify their camp, the legionaries fell into utter despair. They no longer had any chance of escape. On the fourth day, they were again ambushed in a forested area, and by noon it was all over. Varus could not live with this disgrace. Other commanders either surrendered or followed Varus's example. After 4 days of continuous fighting, the Germans had wiped out 3 legions. The Roman survivors were tortured before being sacrificed to the gods. Their heads were pinned to trees and their skulls were taken home as souvenirs. Although different sources describe what happened in the Teutoburg forest differently, the result of this battle was basically the same: the complete defeat of the Roman army and the loss of control over the territories east of the Rhine River. The freedom-loving and warlike tribes of Germania drove out of the seemingly invincible Roman army and shattered its reputation in the eyes of the entire ancient world. Rome's previously successful wars of conquest had steadily inflated the empire's sense of superiority over neighboring powers, especially in northern and central Europe. The tragedy at Teutoburg Forest instilled fear in the hearts of the Romans. The historian Suetonius writes that Emperor Augustus, as a sign of mourning, did not cut his beard and hair for months and often wailed, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." Tiberius conducted 3 successive campaigns against the Germanic tribes, but chose not to occupy their lands east of the Rhine. Instead, he deployed at least 8 legions along the border to protect the provinces of eastern Gallia from Germanic invasion. In the fall of AD 14, a Roman general named Germanicus led a vengeful campaign into Germany in search of the fallen legions. He hit every spot where Varus's column had been attacked and buried the remains of the dead in the Teutoburg forest at Varus's final resting place. Germanicus subdued several nearby tribes and recovered at least 1 standard. By 16 AD, he had recaptured the Lip Valley and much of the North Sea coast. However, Tiberius, now emperor, again decided not to subject the area to Roman rule, instead hoping that the Germanicus campaign would serve as a warning. During the unification of Germany in the 19th century, Arminius became a symbol of German freedom. Although largely forgotten in West Germany after World War II, Arminius was celebrated in East Germany as a revolutionary leader who united the proletarian Germanic tribes against Roman rule. And the Battle of Teutoburg Forest is still considered the most important defeat in Roman history, ending the triumphant period of Roman expansion.
However, this defeat, while playing an important role in the history of Rome and possibly all of Europe, came after the Romans had repeatedly triumphed over adversaries who greatly outmatched them. Now we will tell you how Roman ingenuity allowed them to crush the mightiest force of that time.
In the year 256 BC, during the First Punic War between Rome and Carthage, a truly staggering naval battle took place, involving 690 ships and over 290,000 people. What's even more astonishing is that the Romans, who initially had almost no naval power at the beginning of the war, managed to create a fleet of their own within just 8 years, rivaling Carthage, which had the most powerful fleet in the Mediterranean at that time. This battle rightfully holds the title of the most extensive naval engagements in the history of humanity. For comparison, the largest naval battle of World War I, the Battle of Jutland, involved 250 ships and 100,000 people. In World War II, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, there were 367 ships and about 200,000 people. Only in terms of the number of ships, the Battle of Salamis might surpass this, with some reports indicating the involvement of 700 to 1,270 Persian and Greek ships. However, they were smaller in size, and the number of people participating in that battle was less. So no battle before or after has managed to surpass the scale of the Battle of Cape Ecnomus. In the early 3rd century, thanks to its favorable location at the crossroads of trade routes, Carthage virtually controlled all trade in the Mediterranean. The Carthaginians dominated the African coastline from the Gulf of Sidra to the Columns of Hercules, as well as the southwest of the Iberian Peninsula, the Balearic Islands, Sardinia, Corsica, and a significant part of the island of Sicily. Sicily in particular held great importance for Carthage. This region acted as a shield, protecting Carthaginian territories in Africa, primarily from the Greeks. Consequently, the war between the Carthaginians and the Greeks in that area was almost incessant. However, by the beginning of the First Punic War, fortune favored Carthage, and a subsequent part of the island of Sicily fell into the Carthaginian hands. Carthage's next objective was to capture the city of Messana, as it would provide the Carthaginians control over the Strait of Messina. Fortune once again smiled upon Carthage in 265 BC, when Hiero II, the king of Syracuse, attacked Messana in an attempt to reclaim it from the Mamertines, mercenaries from Campania who had taken the city several years earlier. Carthage's fleet, stationed nearby, offered the Mamertines an alliance to resist Hiero. However, after successfully defending the city, to the surprise of the Mamertines, Carthaginian forces did not withdraw. This compelled the city's inhabitants to seek help from Rome. This incident marked the beginning of the First Punic War. But first, let's talk about the armies and leadership of the future opposing sides. As mentioned earlier, Carthage controlled a vast part of trade in the Mediterranean, supported by its powerful naval fleets. The Carthaginian army primarily consisted of mercenaries and was quite formidable. However, the command structure of the Carthaginian army faced significant challenges. The highest command positions were held by representatives of the oligarchy, appointed based on their wealth and connections. As a result, these individuals often made erroneous battlefield decisions. In contrast to the mercenary army of Carthage, the Roman army consisted of citizen militias, with the legion as the main structural unit. During wars, Rome would assemble 4 legions, commanded by 2 consuls elected each year. Each consul therefore had 2 legions under their command. Unlike Carthage, Rome primarily waged its wars on land, and as a result, had almost no naval forces. By the beginning of the First Punic War, the Romans controlled territories in central and southern Italy, with their borders backed by the island of Sicily. They were reluctant to share direct borders with such a powerful state, especially not wanting Carthage to control the Strait of Messina. This is why it was crucial for the Romans not to let the Carthaginians establish themselves in the city, and the plea for help from the Mamertines became the decisive factor in sending 2 legions under the command of Consul Appius Claudius Caudex to liberate the city from Carthage. Soon, with Rome's support, the Mamertines successfully drove the Carthaginians out of the city. However, the Roman army still couldn't cross the strait and reach Messana because Carthage controlled the sea. Carthaginian commander Hanno, joining forces with Hiero II, besieged Messana, waiting to intercept the Roman landing. Carthaginian commander Hanno warned the Romans that his fleet would ensure they couldn't even wash their hands in the sea. Faced with such a reaction from Carthage, the Roman consul proposed a peaceful settlement, but it was rejected by the Carthaginian commander. However, the Roman ships and the 16,000-strong army of Rome could not be stopped and eventually reached Messana. Some sources suggest that Appius Claudius claimed he couldn't wage war without the people's permission and pretended to lead the fleet back to Italy. When the Carthaginians believed this and lifted the city blockade, Claudius turned the ships around and landed in Sicily. According to another version, Claudius's troops secretly crossed the strait at night. Regardless, the outcome was the same. Appius Claudius broke the siege of the city, defeated both the Carthaginian and Syracusan armies, and established control over Messana. In the following year, Consul Manius Valerius Maximus Messala replaced Claudius and besieged Syracuse. Hiero surrendered before the Carthaginian fleet could offer assistance, and by agreeing to become an ally of Rome, he was allowed to remain in power. The loss of an ally did not halt Carthage, and in 262 BC, they sent another army to Sicily. Meanwhile, the Romans continued to capture city after city, gradually taking control of the island's territory. In 262 BC, with 4 legions led by consuls L. Postumius Magellus and Q. Mamilius Vetulus, they besieged Acragas. When the Carthaginians attempted to defend their ally, they suffered defeat, and the city was plundered. After the fall of Acragas, numerous cities located deep within the island switched sides to the Romans, fearing a similar fate. However, the coastal cities, still apprehensive of Carthage's fleet, remained under its control. By 261 BC, it became evident that the situation had reached an impasse. Even if Rome were to conquer the entirety of Sicily, Carthage would still control the sea. Therefore, if the Romans wanted to defeat the Carthaginians, they needed a fleet capable of handling this challenge. The task needed urgent resolution, as Carthage had already blockaded Rome's maritime communications and trade. The Romans decided to build their own fleet and challenge the Carthaginians at sea. However, a fleet built for a single occasion could be easily defeated and sunk. Therefore, Rome faced a broader task: to create a tradition of naval shipbuilding from scratch. Unlike Rome, Carthage had colossal experience in ship construction and sailor training. Still, in terms of adaptability and ingenuity, the Romans surpassed their adversaries. The ancient Greek historian Polybius mentions that during the first battle near Messana, a Carthaginian quinquereme was fortuitously washed ashore on the Apennine Peninsula, and this vessel served as a model for the subsequent construction of the Roman fleet. The way Rome tackled the issue of lacking a functional fleet is truly imaginative. Understanding that they had little time for shipbuilding and sailor training, the Romans launched partially completed ships into the water and began training the crew, while simultaneously, workers continued to finish building the ship at sea. Additionally, to expedite crew training, the Romans constructed ship models on the shore, where assembled crews practiced handling oars. This rational approach to the task contributed to the lightning-fast construction of the fleet. Ancient historians report that within 60 days, the Romans managed to build 20 triremes and 100 quinquereme warships, each equipped with 3 banks of rowers organized into groups of 5. Despite the fact that the quality and seafaring characteristics of their ships lagged behind those of Carthage, the Romans had another ace in the hole, thanks to which victories in naval battles did not take long to materialize. In 260 BC, the Roman fleet, under the command of Consul Gaius Duilius, was stationed in the city of Messana. Upon hearing rumors that the Carthaginians were ravaging the lands near the city of Mylae, Gaius Duilius decided to immediately advance towards the enemy. Upon learning of the Roman approach, the Carthaginian ships, commanded by Hannibal Gisco, sailed into the open sea to engage Rome in battle. Hannibal had at his disposal 130 vessels, while the Roman forces numbered about 100 ships. It was this numerical superiority and the disdainful attitude toward the Roman fleet that led the Carthaginian commander to disregard formation. Hannibal's first line of ships was already nearing the Romans, ready to deliver the customary Carthaginian ramming attacks, and the Punic commander likely began to notice the unusual hooks on the sides of the Roman ships. However, it was already too late. That was the ace in the hole we were talking about earlier. A new Roman invention that was supposed to tilt the tide of naval battles with Carthage, the corvus. The device consisted of a rotating platform with a giant holding spike resembling a beak. This bridge, measuring 36 feet in length, could be lowered onto an empty ship, allowing a heavy infantry unit to board the opponent. This idea would nullify the superior seamanship of the Carthaginians and turn naval combat into something more akin to land warfare, where the Romans excelled. Carthage, on the other hand, employed a completely different tactic in naval warfare. They rammed the enemy ships into the stern, piercing them, or broke the oars of the opponents with ramming blows. However, the Roman corvus, besides literally turning naval battles into land-based combat, also rendered Carthage's ramming tactics almost useless. When a ship rammed the stern of the enemy, it needed to back away to free itself from the hole in the enemy ship, causing water to rush in through the opening, leading the enemy ship to sink. But now, after a Carthaginian ship pierced a Roman vessel, the corvus firmly secured the two ships, preventing the Carthaginian ship from backing away. This invention had incredible success and brought the Romans an immediate victory in the Battle of Mylae. Gaius Dilius defeated the Carthaginian fleet, earning him a Roman triumph, the first in Roman history awarded for a naval victory.
Inscribed on the column erected in Rome in honor of Gaius Duilius was the claim that he captured 31 ships and sank 13. 3,000 Carthaginians were taken prisoner, and 7,000 perished in the battle.
Roman losses were insignificant. However, this was just the beginning. The next decisive battle would take place at Cape Ecnomus, where the two largest fleets in history would clash. After 2 years of deadlock, during which the Romans contented themselves with raids on Corsica and Sardinia, they won another naval battle at Sulci in 258 BC. Emboldened by their military successes and eager to conclude the war swiftly, the Romans decided to shift their military operations to Africa, either to capture Carthage or force its surrender. To achieve this goal, Rome initiated a grand-scale landing operation. In the spring of 256 BC, the invasion fleet under the command of consuls Marcus Atilius Regulus and Lucius Manlius Vulso set sail from Rome to the city of Messana. For the ambitious operation, 330 ships of various classes were prepared, including combat vessels, quinqueremes, triremes, and transport ships carrying troops, equipment, and supplies. The total personnel of the fleet amounted to 140,000 people, including 100,000 rowers and 40,000 legionnaires. In Messana, the fleet was brought to full combat readiness, and the troops were distributed among the ships. However, a portion of the forces was sent by land to the southern coast of the island of Sicily. This is where the troops were to rendezvous with a squadron tasked with circumnavigating the island from the east and arriving at Cape Ecnomus, the point from which they planned to sail to Africa. Concealing such a massive operation was virtually impossible, and Carthage already knew about Rome's plans. Therefore, preparations for the Carthaginian counteraction began swiftly. Carthage's main task was to prevent the Romans from landing in Africa because an open confrontation with the legions could end disastrously for the Carthaginians. Moreover, Carthage did not rely on the loyalty of the local population. The subjugated African tribes were eagerly awaiting an opportunity to rid themselves of the occupiers. Therefore, the Carthaginians decided to intercept and destroy the Roman ships en route to Africa. In Carthage, a fleet of 350 warships was assembled, with a total crew of about 150,000 people, including 50,000 warriors and 100,000 sailors. Commanding this fleet were Hanno II and Hamilcar, not to be confused with Hamilcar Barca. This was a different Hamilcar. The fleet set sail from Carthage first to Lilybaeum, and then followed the coastline of the island of Sicily toward Cape Ecnomus. The Carthaginians understood that they were about to encounter the Romans and were prepared for it. For the Romans, the primary goal was to reach Africa, so the construction of their fleet was optimized for a maritime campaign under constant threats of Carthaginian attacks. The consuls divided their fleet into 4 divisions. In the vanguard, under the command of the consuls, were the 1st and 2nd divisions. They were arranged in the form of diverging wings, creating a V-shaped wedge, with the tip directed forward. Thanks to this formation, the outer side of each ship was shielded by the following ship. The 3rd division was arranged in a line, forming the base of the resulting triangle. Its task was to cover the rear of the 1st and 2nd divisions, and to tow and protect the transport ships. Completing the formation was the 4th, Reserve Division. It was arranged with large intervals between the ships, thus projecting beyond the flanks of the triangular arrangement. The Carthaginian ships were arranged more traditionally in a single line. The right flank extended far into the sea, led by Hanno. The center was commanded by Hamilcar, while the ships on the left flank were deployed along the coast towards the enemy. It was on the flanks that the fastest Carthaginian ships were concentrated. This tactic was chosen because the Carthaginians understood that the Roman ships had 2 main problems: low speed and vulnerability from the rear. The Carthaginian commanders wanted to exploit these weaknesses. They also understood that with this formation, the Romans could break through the Carthaginian ships only if the Carthaginian ships stood still. Hanno and Hamilcar wanted to lure the Romans into a trap. The ships in the center were ordered not to engage in battle, but to retreat, maintaining distance. Thus, the Carthaginians planned to surround the Roman ships, and after encircling them, strike at the foundations of the Roman formation. This tactic could have ensured a decisive victory for Carthage, but due to an inadvertent mistake by the Roman command, the entire Carthaginian plan went awry. Initially, everything went exactly as Carthaginian commanders had planned. Carthaginian ships were retreating, and the Roman fleet was in pursuit. However, an unexpected turn of events occurred, something Hanno and Hamilcar had not anticipated. The Roman formation began to disintegrate on its own. The first two Roman divisions got engrossed in chasing the Carthaginian center, while the third and fourth divisions started falling hopelessly behind due to the transport ships slowing their progress. Interestingly, it was this mistake by the Romans that disrupted the well-laid plan of Carthaginian commanders. Now, the flanks of their fleets couldn't completely encircle the Roman ships, and attacking the first and second divisions was a bad idea, because in such a case, the Carthaginian assault ships would be at risk of being surrounded. Therefore, the decision was made to halt the retreat and initiate an attack. Hanno, along with the right flank, attacked the reverse Roman ships, while the left flank attacked the ships towing the transport vessels. A fierce battle ensued in the center. From the right flank, the fast Carthaginian ships under Hanno's command struck the 4th Roman division. Here, Carthage had a clear superiority. Roman ships were cramped by the transport vessels and struggled to fend off Hanno's attacks. Finally, the ships of the 3rd Roman division decided to abandon the transport ships and retreat to maneuver, offering resistance to the enemy. The battle split into 3 disjointed encounters. It's not surprising that in the battles between the 4th Roman division and Hanno, and between the 3rd division and the left Carthaginian flank, the latter emerged victorious, as initially, the most maneuverable ships were positioned on Carthage's flanks. However, in the center, the opposite was happening. The 1st and 2nd Roman divisions housed the most formidable ships, and the consuls themselves were in command. The exhausting and bloody battle in the center sector gradually but steadily began to favor Rome. Hamilcar's ships were pushed back and soon turned to flee. The consuls then made the right decision that determined the outcome of the battle. Instead of pursuing the retreating forces, they advanced to assist the 3rd and 4th fleets. Marcus Atilius Regulus moved to aid the 4th division, which was battling with Hanno. Roman ships began surrounding the Carthaginian fleet, and realizing that they were trapped, the Carthaginians started to retreat. Meanwhile, the 3rd Roman division was pushed toward the shore, but the Carthaginians, fearing the Corvus and understanding that they couldn't win in a boarding battle, hesitated to attack the Roman ships. They simply pressed them against the shore and stood opposite, waiting. However, to the misfortune of the Carthaginians, all their forces were already shattered, and they awaited only the Roman fleet, which surrounded them from behind. This pressure sealed the final outcome of the battle. The consuls attacked the Carthaginian ships from behind. The matter was resolved very quickly. 50 ships were captured along with their crews, and only a few ships managed to break free from the encirclement and escape. The battle concluded. The Romans achieved a decisive victory. The Carthaginians retreated to their bases. Following the battle, 30 Carthaginian ships were sunk, and 64 were captured by the Romans. Rome, on the other hand, lost 24 ships. Carthage's losses in manpower ranged from 30,000 to 40,000, while Rome's losses were much lower, around 10,000 casualties. After the battle, the Romans stayed on the island of Sicily for some time for ship repairs and to replenish supplies. After all preparations, the Roman fleet set sail towards the African coast. No one obstructed their path. Carthage's fleet was completely shattered and demoralized. The invasion of Africa had begun, but that is another story. Following the battle, Rome demonstrated its ability to adapt rapidly to any conditions of war, whether on land or at sea. If someone ever asks you, Why do you think about the Roman Empire? Tell them this story. How even in the days of the Republic, the Romans, thanks to perseverance, quick learning, and incredible inventiveness, managed to build a fleet almost from scratch in the shortest time.
And this is an excellent example that mercenaries are not always the best solution, while a people's militia, even being less prepared, will not flee the battlefield at the first opportunity. The next battle also confirms this thesis.
The bow, without exaggeration, is one of the most important inventions in humanity. It likely appeared during the Neolithic era, when the extinction of mammoths forced people to hunt smaller prey. Over time, the hunting tool transformed into a weapon for human conflict. Many believe that the bow remained unchanged from the Neolithic period to the Middle Ages, but that's not the case. For instance, if we compare the bow to firearms, the ancient Neolithic bow is like a flintlock rifle, while the English longbow is akin to a medieval AK-47. Powerful, rapid-firing, reliable, and most importantly, inexpensive compared to other weapons. The crossbow marked a new chapter in the evolution of the bow, surpassing most of its technical characteristics. Firstly, the crossbow was much more powerful than the bow. The crossbow bolt, unlike an arrow, had greater weight, resulting in higher penetrating power, allowing it to pierce light armor. Some more powerful, later medieval crossbows could even penetrate plate armor. Secondly, training a crossbowman in the medieval era took less time than training an archer. However, despite its technical superiority, why couldn't the crossbow replace the bow? The reason lies in the fact that on the battlefield, these technical characteristics were not enough. Comparing the crossbow and the longbow, the latter significantly outperforms in rate of fire, and the rate of fire is determined solely by the archer's skill. For example, a 14th century English archer could release between 10 to 12 arrows per minute, with some more experienced warriors reaching a rate of 16 arrows per minute. Meanwhile, a crossbowman achieving 2 to 3 bolts per minute was considered a good result. The second drawback of the crossbow is that at long distances, the bolt behaves less predictably than the arrow, making well-trained archers more accurate than the crossbowmen. And these two factors prove to be more important on the battlefield. You can argue for a long time about what is better, a crossbow or a bow. But I think the best answer to this question could be given by the most effective crossbowmen in Europe, who in August 1346, along with the French cavalry, were shot down by English archers. In this battle, the French, despite their significant numerical advantage, suffered such monstrous losses that the reputation of the unbeatable French knights cavalry was forever shattered. What's even more dreadful is that 1,542 noble knights, including many French magnates and King John of Bohemia, were killed on the battlefield. This event has gone down in history as the Battle of Crecy. At the beginning of the 14th century, the English king ruled Wales, part of Ireland, England itself, and Gascony on the mainland, which was the most important source of revenue for the English crown. First of all, this territory benefited the English thanks to the double duty on wine, when exporting wines from Bordeaux and when importing them into England. In return, Gascon traders had monopoly access to the English market, which recouped all costs. This relationship was therefore mutually beneficial to both players. However, France was not willing to have its continental part controlled by the English and consistently tried to push them out. But you might wonder how such a remote piece of France came into the hands of the English. To answer that question, we need to go back 200 years to the 11th century when the Norman Duke William defeated the Anglo-Saxon army of Harold Godwinson and became the rightful king of England while retaining his control over the Duchy of Normandy in northern France. This led to a paradoxical situation. As the Duke of Normandy, William acknowledged the suzerainty of the King of France, but in England, he had an equal feudal status with the French king. In the 12th century, the situation in France became even more peculiar. Under the rule of the new English kings, House of Plantagenet, there is a territory of France larger than that of the suzerain. Fortunately for France, this did not last long, as French kings, starting with Philip II Augustus, managed to reclaim most of the continental territories from the French monarchs, leaving them with only Gascony. Despite formally agreeing to English ownership of this territory, France repeatedly attempted to forcibly reclaim the territory in the future. The tense situation in Gascony left no doubt that a large-scale military conflict between England and France was inevitable, and the death of the last king of the direct line of the House of Capet, Charles IV, in 1328, marked the final prelude to the war. The French king left no male heirs who could succeed him on the throne. The ensuing power struggles were as intriguing as those in the books of George R.R. Martin. The French nobility chose Philippe Valois, the cousin of Charles IV, as the regent of the kingdom. However, the situation became complicated when Charles IV's sister, Isabella, the wife of the late English King Edward II, claimed her right to the throne. According to inheritance rules, she had more rights to become the new Queen of France than Philip. However, her candidacy faced strong resistance from the French aristocracy, because in France's history, a woman had never ruled. The French even justified their refusal with the Salic law, which excluded women from inheriting the throne. But Isabella was determined and declared that if there was a law preventing her from claiming the throne, it did not apply to her 16-year-old son Edward. However, the French nobility did not even consider his candidacy, as the last thing they wanted was an English king on the French throne. Therefore, Philip was proclaimed king, entering history as Philip VI de Valois. The events that followed were equally fascinating, but since you came here to hear about the battle, I'll give you a concise overview. Formally, the King of England, Edward III, did acknowledge Philip's authority. Still, he had no intention of renouncing his claims to the French throne. Therefore, starting from 1330, the English began preparing for war. Firstly, the English had to deal with Scotland, which was an ally of France. The Scots could potentially interfere with Edward's war against the French king. Meanwhile, Philip did not consider the English a serious threat, as the French night cavalry had proven itself on the battlefield many times. Thanks to their cavalry, the French army was considered one of the best in Europe. Taking advantage of the fact that the English king was busy at war with the Scots, Philip Valois in May 1337 announced the confiscation of Gascony. However, England could not easily relinquish such an economically vital territory. Therefore, Edward immediately declared war on France, asserting that the kingdom rightfully belonged to him. To reinforce his claims, the English king ordered the inclusion of the emblem of the House of Capet in his royal coat of arms. The war had begun. Having completed preparations for military actions, Edward III landed on the continent in 1338. In Antwerp, he formed an alliance with Jacob van Artevelde, the leader of the Flemish cities, gained the support of several rulers in the Netherlands, and later formed an alliance with the Holy Roman Emperor Louis IV the Bavarian. A year later, in 1339, Edward laid siege to the Cambrai, and as chroniclers claimed, set fire to 1,000 villages in the region, prompting Philip to move his forces to confront Edward. On October 22nd, the French and English armies approached each other near Brunfus, but neither dared to engage in battle. Victory in the skirmish would bring no significant advantage to either side, given the high risks involved. After this campaign, Edward's financial situation deteriorated to the point that in Bruges, he had to pawn his own crown, leave several prominent aristocrats and the Queen Philippa of Hainault as hostages. He also had to promise the bankers that if he returned to the continent without money, he would personally become their hostage. Upon his arrival in London in 1340, he persuaded Parliament of the need for a new tax, causing widespread discontent in England. Therefore, the English king needed to force the French into battle as quickly as possible, and such an opportunity soon presented itself. On June 24, 1340, Edward defeated the French fleet in the Battle of Sluys.
This allowed him to transfer troops and supplies to the continent. However, the subsequent campaign proved unsuccessful. With the support of the Flemish, the English army could not capture the city of Tournai, and the siege lasted for several months. During this time, the Pope, at the request of the French, managed to break Edward's alliance with the Holy Roman Emperor, and a war with Scotland resumed in the north of the island. All of this, combined with ongoing financial problems, forced the English king to agree to a 5-year truce. Afterward, the war erupted on an incredible scale. Once the border with the Scots was secured, Edward resumed his offensive in 1345, this time in Gascony and Guyenne, as the killing of Jacob van Artevelde made it difficult for the English to use Flanders as a base of operations. The English army, commanded by Henry of Grosmont, defeated superior French forces at Auberoche in the same year. The English achieved another victory at the Battle of Catharet in Brittany. The French army launched a counterattack only in the following spring. But by July, before the French could consolidate their military success, a large English army led by the king landed in the north. The scale and intensity of the war reached a completely different level. After landing on the continent, Edward III took Caen and moved towards Paris, plundering and burning everything in his path. The French chronicler and eyewitness Jean de Venette wrote that endless smoke from fires could be seen from the fortress walls of Paris. However, capturing the capital was not in the English king's plans. He crossed the Seine and headed for Picardy. Philip, leading the French army, pursued Edward and caught up with him only on August 26. And after years of war, the two rulers finally met near the village of Crecy, where the decisive battle took place. Anticipating a French attack, Edward found an excellent battleground, a wide and long hill to the northeast of the village of Crecy. One side of the hill sloped down to an old Roman road, the other to the forest. Such a hill was intended to complicate the attack of the French cavalry. To make the French attack even more challenging, the English dug numerous pits in front of their positions. There is still no definite answer as to what the size of the English king's army was. Most likely, around 15,000 to 20,000 warriors landed on the continent. But by the time of the battle, their number was clearly less. Around 7,000 to 12,000, including knights, light infantry, and deadly archers armed with the English longbow. These longbows were about 5 to 6 feet long, usually made of yew. Longbowmen also had arrows capable of piercing armor. To give arrows more weight, they were made of oak and were about 33 inches long. The crucial factor in the proficiency of the archers was that all subjects of the English king who owned land worth at least £2 had to practice longbow shooting weekly. Thus, a large reserve of skilled archers was formed in England, ready to go to war at any moment. The English army was divided into 3 groups, 2 of which were advanced. The left group was commanded by Richard Fitzalan, Earl of Arundel, and the right by 16-year-old Edward the Black Prince, the king's son. The third group, commanded by the English king, was in the rear, near the windmill as a strategic reserve. The first 2 groups consisted of armored warriors in the center and archers on the flanks, while the third group was on horseback. The English also had several primitive firearms with them. On the morning of August 26, 1346, the English army was deployed and ready for battle. Like with the English army, the exact number of King Philip's army is also unknown, but it was reliably known that they far outnumbered the English. It is generally believed that there were about 20,000 to 30,000 men. Unlike the English, the key element of the French army was heavy night cavalry. Armored riders repeatedly led the French to victory and were considered among the best in Europe. However, the emphasis on the nightly components of the French army led to low military training of its infantry, and realizing this, the French preferred to hire infantry outside their kingdom. Mercenary crossbowmen from Genoa often entered French service, and this battle was no exception. The French approached the battlefield closer to the end of the day, around 6 p.m., and many commanders advised the king to postpone the start of the battle until the next day so that the French soldiers could rest after a long journey. Philip agreed with this and ordered the vanguard to stop. However, the French knights following behind did not want to comply with this order. They wanted to quickly avenge the atrocities the English committed on the kingdom's territory. In the end, they managed to persuade King Philip that the battle needed to start today. The French army began to form for battle in 3 groups, positioned one behind the other. The first group consisted of crossbowmen and riders under the command of France's ally, John the Blind, the King of Bohemia. The second group comprised the elite of the French knight cavalry and noblemen of France, commanded by King Philip's brother Charles II, Count of Alençon. The third group included all other cavalry, with King Philip himself in command. The first to advance was the group of Genoese and French crossbowmen. However, as they began their attack, a short but intense summer rain started, dampening the crossbow strings and reducing the range of the crossbowmen. The fact that the English stood on a hill prevented significant damage. During the rain, the English quickly removed the strings from their bows, so when it was their turn to shoot, they unleashed a barrage of arrows on the mercenaries. Considering that longbowmen could shoot up to 10 arrows per minute, and the number of English archers was around 3,000, one can only imagine the monstrous hail of arrows. According to these calculations, up to 30,000 arrows were flying toward the French every minute. Crossbowmen without special protection like the pavise shield found themselves defenseless against the deadly rain of arrows. Historians still debate why they did not bring shields. Most likely, the crossbowmen did not anticipate the battle happening that day and did not have time to fetch shields from the baggage train. The result was colossal losses for the crossbowmen. To further demoralize the mercenaries, the English fired firearms, after which the Genoese turned to flee. However, the French knights from the second group blocked their retreat. Charles II, Count of Alençon, ordered the killing of retreating mercenaries. The riders mercilessly rode through the crossbowmen, ultimately only slowing down the advance of the cavalry. The collision of the 2 French groups became the perfect target for the English archers. Climbing the hill with difficulty under a continuous hail of arrows, the French knights finally engaged in battle with the English infantry. However, the French could not establish themselves on the hill. Horses refused to break through the living wall of foot soldiers, and the firearms of the English continued to shoot, frightening the horses even more. French losses were rapidly increasing, but the knights kept attacking. A particularly fierce battle took place on the right flank, commanded by the son of King Edward. Almost surrounded by French cavalry, the young prince sent for help to his father. However, the King of England refused his son, saying, "Let the boy win his spurs." However, shortly afterward, Edward sent a small aid to the Black Prince, and he managed to repel the French attack. By this time, the sun had already set, but the battle showed no signs of subsiding. Next to charge were the Bohemian Knights, led by their blind king. His bodyguards tied the reins of their horses together to lead John of Bohemia to the battlefield. Initially, this attack even had some success, but too soon in the twilight, the English, unable to distinguish heraldic signs, killed the king and his knights. The French attacked a total of 15 times, but all attempts proved unsuccessful. Seeing the catastrophic situation of his army, King Philip of France himself joined the battle, but was wounded in the face by an arrow and forced to retreat. After this, the English cavalry advanced, prompting the final withdrawal of the French. Closer to nightfall, the battle subsided. In the end, the weary English, still unaware of the full scale of their victory, camped on the hill for the night. The next morning, the English tallied the number of casualties on the battlefield. English losses were minimal. Medieval historian Jean Froissart wrote that among the English, 3 knights and 20 archers perished. However, some modern historians suggested that this number is too low and that the death toll among the English could have been around 300. Nevertheless, these losses were disproportionately small compared to the losses of the French army.
between 10,000 and 20,000 men were killed and wounded, including 1,542 noble knights, among whom were many French magnates. King John of Bohemia, Philip's brother, Charles II, Count of Alençon, 9 princes, 10 counts, a duke, an archbishop, and a bishop. The reputation of the invincible French mountain knights was forever shattered, and England emerged as a serious player on the European stage. All of Edward's expenditures on the war were able to pay off, and discontent with the new taxes in England ceased. However, this was only the beginning of the 100 Years' War. What do you think? Did the French have a chance to win this battle? Share your opinion in the comments. We really enjoy engaging with you under the video. Also, if you want to see the sequel, then be sure to like, subscribe to the channel, and click on the bell. High views under the video will prompt us to continue this topic. See you